listening to the last Drawing the Ideal Self podcast for 2021. So that's the December episode. And today you'll hear an interview with Jenny Newland. Jenny is a psychotherapist living in Scotland, and she also teaches people kayaking and maths, and has an interesting approach to these three things, which I think shows a lot of overlap, and definitely a PCP approach in each of them. Hi Jenny, so can you tell me a bit about who you are and what you do in your job?
Oh, right, yes. At the moment, most of my job is psychotherapy and private practice, and a little bit of it is maths teaching.
An interesting combination.
Yes. Not so different as you might think, but...
Oh, okay.
And I'm also a whitewater kayak coach.
Whitewater kayak coach.
And believe it or not, I can link that in as well.
Oh, can you? So it's like the really scary rivers.
Well, yeah, they are a bit scary. Yeah, it can be.
Flowing. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of your, perhaps we'll take the separate bits then. So in terms of your psychotherapy stuff, how did you come to that? And you obviously have done PCP.
Yes. Well, I was on the receiving end of some PCP therapy at one point in my life. And that was probably my proper introduction to it. I did do a psychology degree a long time ago. And I think there was a wee bit there, but I don't really remember much about that now. But yes, I think my decision to train as a PCP therapist really came out of my experience of being on the receiving end of some PCP therapy.
Okay. So what was it about it that convinced you that it would be an interesting and useful thing to pursue? Must have been something about the way that went.
Yes, and it wasn't just that in isolation. I was a midwife before that, and by the time I came to making a decision to train as a therapist, I think I'd already realised that it was the relationships in midwifery that interested me the most. And there was a lot of evidence around, but also, my own experience of how big an impact the relationship a midwife has with their patients can have on the woman's experiences and quite often the outcomes as well. So I just got more and more interested in everything to do with relationship building and what relationship could do. And yes.
The interesting thing is that it came from it sounds like a combination of an experience that you had in terms of being on the receiving end, but also something that was going on in your professional life that was about, I don't know, seeking maybe more opportunity for meaning or helping people with meaning.
Yes, I think I wanted to develop, I wanted to move more into that the opportunities were limited, shall we say, certainly in mainstream NHS midwifery.
Yes.
You've only got limited time with people. There's a lot of passing from one professional to another. I did do a bit of independent midwifery, which is very different, where you have your own your own clients and you see them all the way through from the beginning to the end, and you attend the birth as well. And I suppose within that context, you have a lot of scope for developing a relationship and seeing how that pans out and what it does for people. But it's also a very scary place to work, and the independent sector, it's not very well supported, so I didn't do that for very long. Ultimately, I wanted to move on from midwifery. The hours didn't suit me, the being on call and things like that didn't fit with family life, and I needed to move on and do something else, and so psychotherapy seemed to be a good option that brought everything together with my psychology degree and then the midwifery experience. And I'd done a bit of work with people with drugs problems and a few odds and ends, bits of voluntary work and things. So it just kind of came together. And when I was looking for a training, I didn't automatically go for PCP, but I did quite a bit of research, and I included PCP in my research because I'd had the experience of that. And really, it was the only one that sat comfortably with me as a framework.
Okay, so you must have, because you're based in Scotland, aren't you?
Yes.
So did you have to go to London to do that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, once a month.
Yeah.
For years.
Okay.
I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, I did too. It's the only course that I loved all the way through. Every time I went, I've done lots of courses, and
yeah,
they usually have a boring part. That didn't.
Yeah, it was a good process then.
Yeah. Okay. So that was your move into psychotherapy. So tell us about the maths then.
Yeah, that came a bit later than the psychotherapy. I was already involved in education through being an active member of my local home educating group, or Edinburgh's home educating group, which was quite extensive.
Okay.
And I was doing some tutoring and working with some children who were, well, two in particular, who were highly numerate, very intelligent, very quick, very fast, and yet experiencing huge amounts of distress and frustration with maths. And this presented a conundrum to me, a puzzle. I would say I'd had quite a mediocre maths experience at school myself. I'd enjoyed the process to an extent, but I wasn't brilliant at it at all. But I couldn't see why these children weren't thriving with it. And so it led me to, in PCP fashion, seek some alternatives to what I do. And I did quite a bit of researching around to explore sort of who was showing us some different approaches, who was saying something different. And I came across Jo Bowler, who's quite a big name in maths teaching these days. Okay. And she had just started a course, an online course called How We Learn Maths for Teachers. And I read her book, and I was so impressed with the book. I went and did the course, and it was a really good course. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. In terms of online courses, it's the best online course I've ever done. I've done another of her courses since, and it was pretty good, but I'd say that one was the best one.
Okay.
Had a big impact and enabled me to really turn around, forget everything I knew, just discard everything I knew already about maths teaching.
Really?
And turn it on its head and look at it afresh. And the way PCP came into it was part of that course. I saw a video of some maths teaching. There was a lot of videos, but this one in particular really stood out for me. It was a maths teacher with a group of undergraduates who were quite low confidence with their maths. And they weren't maths students, they were students of other subjects who wanted to work on their numeracy because they needed it for their courses, and their school maths hadn't gone well. And it was just a revelation watching this woman teach. And what struck me was it seemed to, knowingly or not knowingly, she demonstrated, from my point of view, all the sort of key PCP principles in her teaching. Okay. And it just made me realize that the things that I knew how to do in therapy, I could apply them to education.
That's interesting.
And yeah, I guess that was the sort of birthing point, if you like, for me, for linking together PCP and teaching.
And had you expected that to happen? When you did the course, did you think, oh, this is going to bring the two together?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
No, I was just interested to, find anything that might be different from what I was doing, because clearly what I was doing wasn't working, wasn't helping, and these kids needed something else.
Right.
But watching this teacher was a bit like watching a therapist in action, really.
Yeah.
She wasn't telling anybody anything. She wasn't correcting anybody. She was drawing their processes out of them in a lovely way.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think maths isn't talked about enough properly. People have done lots of work on reading and the kind of, I don't know, the psychological sort of feelings about not being good at reading and things like that, and how it impacts people. But they forget that you need maths all the time, don't you? So if you're not good at maths, whatever that means, you feel you're not good at maths, then it can really have a big effect on your daily life and your view of yourself.
Yeah.
Is that what you see in the people that you've taught?
Yes, I would say so. And one of the things that drew me to Jo Bowler was I could link her statement very closely. George Kelly's famous for saying no man needs to be the victim, has been his biography, and no one needs to
Paint themselves into a corner, yeah.
Yes. Can't remember the wording. And she says everyone can learn maths to a reasonably high level, providing they're given the right kinds of learning experiences and the right learning environments. To me, those two things are almost saying the same thing. There's a wonderful optimism there, and I don't know how many people do approach maths teaching in that way. Certainly the students don't, but I think someone needs to. And if we can start by approaching teaching in that way, it's something to the students about, we believe, if I believe they can do it, it might rub off on them.
Yes. Yeah. So if somebody came to you because they were really struggling with maths, what would be the first thing that you would either do or talk about with them?
I generally begin with trying to find out whether they love it, hate it, if there's anything they like at all, if there's nothing they like. That's the very first thing, because if there's a little window of something they like, then that's probably where I'd want to begin, because I want to begin in it's a kind of safe place and something that sparks their interest. I generally have a task that I use on a first lesson, which is known as a low floor, high ceiling task, which means that everybody can do some of it. So at the very basic level, it's a very inclusive task. Somebody with hardly any maths at all could engage in the beginnings of it. And the more maths somebody knows, the further they can take it.
Oh, that's interesting.
So a primary school child can do the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And if you follow it as far as it'll go, you can end up with something fairly near the end of secondary school, and something that there's very few students I've taught who've actually been able to take it right through to the end. Even the odd adult hasn't been able to, but that doesn't matter. It's, from my point of view, it's an assessment task on so many levels, because I get to see how they engage with it, what they do with it. It's not a right and wrong answer type of task.
Yeah.
It's an exploratory thing. And so for me, I'm getting information about how they work, what they see, what their observation skills are like.
Yeah, so you're seeing them do the task as much as, if you like, the result of the task.
I'm not really interested in the result, to be honest.
Okay, yeah.
I'm interested in the process.
Okay, yeah, which is very Kellyan, isn't it? But it's about how, as well as where you get to in the end is interesting, but not as interesting as how you got there.
Yeah. I'm totally interested in how they get there, and especially when it's wrong. So again, it's turned on its head. Traditional maths education might just be concerned with right answers.
Yeah,
I'm actually much more interested in the wrong ones, because that's what's going to reveal what's not quite working for the student.
Yeah. Okay.
If we ignore the wrong ones, we'll never know what it is that isn't working.
Yes. And I suppose it could be tempting to do the work on setting the task, so the task is always just about achievable. If finally grade them and not let people have the experience of struggling with something.
Yes, but the struggle's quite important, really.
Yeah, and maybe we feel uncomfortable watching people struggle.
Yes, we can do. It depends how uncomfortable the student is with struggle.
Yeah, I wonder if it depends how uncomfortable the teacher is as well. I'm thinking, I was a teacher a long time ago. If the teacher hasn't had much experience of struggle themselves, whether they view the struggle as more difficult than the student does. Because some kids struggle with everything and it's ordinary for them and maybe not distressing. Someone else might get one thing wrong and be distressed by that.
Be devastated, yes.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting thing, isn't it?
It's fascinating.
So you didn't come to this because you were a maths expert?
Not at all, no.
Okay. What do you think makes it work well? Because some people might think you've got to be, a maths teacher in order to get the best out of people in their maths. So why do you think this approach has succeeded with some of these people?
That's a very good question. Why does it succeed? I think it gives them a creative space. So if I think of say some of the more advanced students, it's maybe a bit more obvious with. So I taught a group of teenagers, a small group of teenagers, and took them through to their GCSE. And I made a habit of setting them very difficult problems, and sometimes the problems might take me a while to do as well.
Yeah.
But I would never tell them how to do it. I was just interested in what they came up with. And I mean, by the time they were doing difficult problems, they were kind of familiar with how I went about things. I taught them for over a number of years.
Yeah.
And it was quite thrilling in a way, because they would all come back with a different way of having done it.
Okay.
And so we'd share how we all did it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would share mine as well. But the interesting thing was their ways were always better.
Right.
Nearly always. Generally, yeah, their solutions were more elegant or more efficient. My solutions tended to mirror the way I'd learned to do it in school. They'd not learned to do it. They were just being creative.
Yeah.
And so obviously they were drawing on whatever math they'd learned so far. But
that's interesting.
Because they've never been, no math methods had ever really been dictated to them.
Yeah.
They came up with their own. And that, like I say, it's stunning. Some of the stuff they come up with, absolutely stunning.
Makes you think how limiting those rigid methods are. And I know there's work in schools to teach children this, and then you move on to that, and you have to follow a particular order. And maybe some of that is to do with trying to teach 30 children in one go.
Oh, yes.
And not treating them as individuals.
Respect for anybody who can do that, because I wouldn't be able to do that. I know that. I can do with small groups. And
it's surprising, really, that anyone learns, isn't it, in that situation? I always think, when people talk about kids learning to read, I think most of the kids basically taught themselves with the resources they have and the scaffolding from the teacher. And only some of them had to be taught by the teacher. And then there are some that were taught by the teacher and still didn't learn. They're the ones that interest me. And it sounds like you've been interested in the same sort of angle of, why can't people learn? What is it about it? And what do you find in relation to maths? Do you find a lot of anxiety?
Oh, yes, huge amounts, and especially around making mistakes. And, that's one of the first things I attempt to break down, is the fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
Because it can be crippling. You can be sitting there and I just want them to, do anything. Do something.
Yeah.
I don't mind if it's right or wrong. Let's just create a starting point, because then we've got something to go from. And then they won't do anything at all because they don't want it to be wrong. The implications of it being wrong are so enormous for them. It's soul destroying, and that can only be because of cultural things they've been through so far around learning and mistake making. So I really work hard to try and create a safe space for mistakes.
Okay.
And I do a bit of, I don't know if you've come across the growth mindset stuff. So I sometimes do a bit of that with them, whether it's some activities or showing them the odd video, or just to try and ease that. So, I mean, sometimes I still, to be honest, sometimes I still can't get them past it. It depends on how badly entrenched they are, and how long I've got to work with them.
Yes.
But
which again is like psychotherapy, isn't it?
Yes.
Some people you can help quicker than others. For some of them, it's going to be a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of the process of being taught maths, I'm wondering about, there aren't many other subjects where someone will put a tick or a cross on every little bit, and that happens with maths, doesn't it? You've got the right answer, here's your tick, you've done that division or whatever it is. Whereas if you're doing history, you write your opinion about how Henry VIII came to the throne or something like that, and you get a tick for a much larger chunk of it. I wonder if that has anything to do with it.
I think the ticking and crossing has a lot to do with it. Yes, it's funny. It's funny you should say that, because I was doing an online lesson with somebody yesterday, and we use an interactive whiteboard. And there was one point where the lad he did get something right, and he he just filled the screen with little green ticks, and then he filled it with little red crosses and said, "We haven't had any of those, have we?" I don't tend to use green ticks and red crosses at all.
Yeah.
I just want to ask questions about things. So, if somebody tells me that 2 and 2 is 5, I'm not going to put a red cross by it. I'm going to say, "Oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me how you got to 5?"
Okay.
And so they'll tell me how they got to 5.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, once they're articulating something, they will actually see where it doesn't make sense and will correct it. And halfway through their narrative, they'll say, "Oh, that doesn't make sense. It isn't 5, is it?" Or something like that.
Okay.
Not always. Sometimes they will come out with a whole load of things that doesn't make sense, but then we have to have a conversation about that, because I'll say, "Oh, I'm finding that really confusing. Can you explain this?" So they become the teacher, teaching me about their sense making, which again is very PCP, isn't it?
Yes.
They are the expert on how their mind works. I'm trying to unfathom it and work out which bits are working and which bits aren't.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you're almost like a maths therapist, in that sense of, drawing something out of people and provided a scaffolding for them to explore, rather than they're going to present you with it and you're going to say, "That's correct," or "That's not correct," or "That's nearly correct." It's not that sort of thing. Sounds much more
really
of a process.
I mean, it does creep in a little bit. Say if somebody's preparing for an exam, and you do have to mark it right or wrong, but
sure.
But we'll still have those conversations, especially about the wrong ones, and sometimes about the right ones as well, because sometimes it's good for them to articulate how they did it when it went right, just so they can be a bit clearer in their own mind of what works. It's again, we would do that in therapy, wouldn't we?
Yeah, definitely.
Go over what was good about that. What did you do? Why do you think it worked? All that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I wonder as well if the maths thing, not enough time is spent on the wrong answer, typically, in a class. So that it's almost like you have to rub it out and get rid of that answer.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I ignore the right. I probably go the other way. Somebody gives me a sheet of homework and it's all right. Well, there's no point in spending any time on that.
Okay.
Ignore it. Let's find something you can't do.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm guessing that when they come to you as a maths tutor, that's quite an unexpected approach.
Yes, I suppose it is.
Yeah. But a much nicer approach, I would say.
Most people seem to like it.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know, are the people that you teach surprised by this different style of teaching math?
I think it might depend a bit what age they are, because I suppose the younger ones, they just accept whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the older ones, I think sometimes they actually find a bit of threat in it. So people have mixed reactions.
Yeah.
There is surprise sometimes, and sometimes it's "Oh, this is actually fun." I've had that, which is very nice.
And I guess there's something about, particularly if you've had a lifetime of failure with maths, that it is quite threatening to be seen, to see yourself being able to do it, because then what do you do? Is that kind of, is the implication of that you will always be able to do all maths, or is it that you can only do this little bit of maths, or what? Must be very scary for people who've got an entrenched problem.
I think it is. I even had someone disappear on that basis, an adult that was, who I think was experiencing a huge degree of threat from the experience of a teacher having some patience with them.
I'm thinking about, there've been some TV films about, I'd say Educating Rita, something like that. Do you know that film? About people who suddenly start learning and they change because of what's happening to them and the way they're seeing the world now. And And that must be the same for some of the people that you teach, that they've kind of written themselves off with maths, and now they're finding a different experience. And it might be both joyful and terrifying, I guess, at the same time.
Yeah. It has the potential to be so many things, doesn't it?
Yeah. But it sounds as if you must have to, and because you're teaching either a small group or one person, you can kind of bend yourself to that person. So you can tailor your intervention very closely to where they're at.
That's my aim, yeah. Always the aim.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Maybe something that's not talked about enough. Have you ever written anything about it?
No, I haven't really.
Be interesting.
I've written a little bit of it once, and it was on a website for a while, but the website doesn't exist anymore, so it's not there. I think it's on my website, but but it doesn't really go into it in the kind of depth that we're talking about it now.
Yeah,
so.
It's almost like the psychotherapy of learning maths.
Yes.
Or something. That's interesting. And the other thing that you said that you're involved with is the kayaking.
Yes.
So you've got three apparently different things, but what's the thread that pulls them together? The kind of psychotherapy, the maths, the kayaking.
Yes, I think the lovely thing about the kayaking is in a way things are a bit more black and white, and you get you get results from your experiments very quickly.
I can imagine.
So, but in the way in the thread that sort of links them together, if I'm coaching a whitewater kayaker, they might be coming along because there's some aspect of there might be a particular skill that they're wanting to master, or they might just wanting to be generally better, or they might be wanting to gain confidence. Is quite common. Quite often there's a bit of anxiety involved in they're wanting to gain confidence on the river, something like that.
Yeah.
So again, I'll start from where they are.
Yeah.
What's their understanding of what they're trying to do? If it's not working, what's their understanding of why it's not working? And really try to generate their questions. And out of their questions, we generally design together, if you like, an experiment for them. Okay. There's even a word for that in sports coaching. It's called guided discovery.
Oh, okay.
I probably take it a little bit further in that perhaps traditionally guided discovery is a bit more led by the coach. We would decide we're going to learn this and this is how we're going to do it in a guided discovery way, whereas my PCP slant would have us generate the experiment together out of their questions, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
So if they're sort of saying, does it make a difference whether I angle my boat this way or that way? Should I be angling it this way or that way? And well, it looks like we've got an experiment here. Should you be angling it this way or that way? And let's see what happens if you angle it this way, and let's see what happens if you angle it that way, and you can come back and tell me. I won't let them do any experimentation that's going to ensure that they fall in the water. We keep it within something that's manageable, and hopefully that they can stay dry. And if they're a complete beginner and haven't got a clue, obviously they can't generate an experiment like that because they know nothing about what skills you need to go down a river. But you can still, I guess the angle of PCP I would use then is much more about honing in on their observational skills. What do you see here? What are you noticing? Can you see any features on the river? And then, we can begin to talk about how we might use those. And if it's a new skill, I might demonstrate it and demonstrate a few different ways. And then again, what was the difference what were the similarities between that? What were the similarities? What were the differences?
Okay.
Let's watch a couple of other people do it. What do you observe about them? Are they doing it the same? Are they doing it differently? Things like that. So I'm still drawing their processes out. Yeah.
So does that mean something like if you're looking at a river and there's a boulder that you've got to go round? You might get them to watch some people go around the boulder and see what they make of that. try going around the boulder themselves in different
no,
ways?
It's a bit more refined than that. You might have they might notice there's a boulder which they're going to need to go round. So before we get to that boulder, we might be saying, well, what skills might we need to get around that boulder?
Okay. Yeah.
Let's find a safe place to work out what those might be and learn how to do that skill. So generally, by the time they get to the boulder, they know what to do. So,
right.
You see what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds as if the thing it has in common with the maths is that you are drawing it out of the person and getting them to do an experiment that makes sense in terms of what you're doing, and also that is not in any way dangerous. Just the same way
Absolutely.
Somebody might say, I want to learn to, multiply 5-figure numbers, and they can't add up. You're not going to say, oh, that's a good plan. You want to start somewhere different.
We'd start with, well, what do you do when you're multiplying single-digit numbers?
Yeah.
And then what do you do when you multiply double-digit numbers? And is there a similarity between those two processes? What changes? What do you think might be different if we added another digit?
So they're looking for the similarities and differences.
Yes.
Applies across the psychotherapy as well, doesn't it?
Yes. It's a wonderful tool, similarity. Yes. And there are, I've seen it used in maths as well. There are other teachers that use that.
Yeah.
And I think somebody gave a talk on the PCP meetup fairly recently about using the odd one out.
Yeah. I was there for that.
And obviously similarities and differences comes in a lot if you're looking at odd ones out.
Yeah. So having trained as a PCP psychotherapist, you've been able to apply it to the kayaking and the maths.
Yes.
Seamlessly, it seems.
Well, I don't know about that, but I can talk about it seamlessly.
But you've been able to do that. And I think that's one of the things about Kelly's work, that once you understand the theory well enough, you can apply it to a new situation and work a way of doing it there, which doesn't work for all kinds of psychotherapy very well.
No, I think you've got a point there. I mean, it is hugely adaptable to so many contexts.
Yeah. So if somebody's listening to this and they say, I really want to get very good at kayaking, do you run courses or something like that?
I'm not running any courses at the moment. I do sometimes run some courses, yes.
Right, okay. And how can they find out about that?
I'm listed on the providers on the Scottish Canoe Association website as a coach, as a whitewater coach, and there's some information about me there.
Ah, okay.
Basically, they would need to get in touch with me, and then we'd organise what they want to do.
Yeah.
The sort of, if I'm organising a course, it tends to be within a club, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. I have recently created myself a website called Back to the River, backtothe.river.co.uk. And while I haven't done much about publicising it, it's there, and it's a means of getting in touch.
Yeah, okay, that's good then. So I mean, there may well be somebody who is listening and is near enough to where you are to think, okay, that would be great, or who wants to experience an approach to coaching that's PCP approach rather than something else, because I'm not sure what the typical training would be for a coach.
The kayak coaching trainings are very good, and they explore a lot of different styles of coaching.
Okay.
And, I guess ultimately people pick what, just like with therapy, they use the bits that resonate with them. Okay. Yes, I'm not the only coach in Scotland who's familiar with PCP, because I've introduced another coach.
Ah, have you? Okay. Oh, that's good. Great. Spreading the word. And what about maths? We do know that there are some people who listen to the podcast who are teachers, maybe more primary than secondary. If there are people who are interested in trying to have a conversation with you about trying to develop their approach a bit more, do you ever offer something like that?
Well, the offer's there. I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to speak about these things, yes.
Oh, okay, that's good too. Good. And what about psychotherapy? You offer that. Is that on your website?
Yes, that's on the PCP Living and Learning website.
Okay.
I'm based in Perth, so I think if you Google me and Perth together, then you find me quite easily.
Okay. And do you offer things on Zoom?
Yes. Most of my work is on Zoom at the moment.
Okay. So it doesn't matter where people are in the country.
It doesn't actually matter, no.
Yeah. And that is the joy of the online experience, isn't it? That it enables people to get in touch from wherever they are in the world.
Yes, it's exciting from that point of view.
Yeah, it is. So you're doing one of the PCP meetups coming up soon.
That's right, yes.
So tell people what your session is.
I think I've titled it Exploring Challenges in PCP. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that I do, not repeating what we've just said, but there might be some similarities, and how I've met some of the challenges in PCP myself.
Yeah.
I was planning to dip into psychotherapy, maths, and kayaking. And then I've got a few questions that people have submitted about PCP, which I was going to kind of explore in a sort of group activity type way.
Okay. Well, that'll be interesting.
Questions around some of the things that they found challenging. So
yeah. So I'll put in the show notes the date of your session. So I suppose if you think of people who are listening to this podcast, they might not be that familiar yet with that much of PCP. So they're kind of newbies or people who are developing their skills, but really want to learn some more. Anything that you would suggest either that they might try using or any advice in terms of development, what they could do?
I think in a teaching context, I would have to encourage people to experiment.
Yeah.
And particularly perhaps with the areas of taking a curious stance with students, not just a curious stance, but a respectful, curious stance. I was thinking about this before we spoke, and there is quite a movement in maths education towards using tasks that really lend themselves to this kind of approach, and open-ended tasks. They're often called rich tasks and inquiry-based learning, things like this. And there's a lot of wonderful resources out there under those headings. But I think, if I think about the difference between the classroom and therapy, for example, I think what's often missing is the respect for the learner's processes and perhaps the curiosity as to what are these students doing with this? And I suppose it's having the courage as a teacher, as we spoke about before, to step back from the expert position, from the person who needs to feed them knowledge, and experiment with taking a curious approach to see what do they come up with? How are they making sense of this? And sometimes what they come up with is completely off the wall, but it's all information. It's valuable information, and sometimes what they come up with is incredible, and it really shows us where our students are at.
Okay.
And that's information about where the learning needs to happen, where it might go. But I think the respect is crucial, and I suppose quite often the kind of hierarchical structure of a school can make it a bit difficult to do that. But it's a bit in line with Kelly's credulous approach, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking that. So, and I think large classes don't help that, do they? Because his approach is individual. And if you're taking a PCP approach to maths, it's going to be an individual approach. And a small group is the most you can go with.
Yes, I know. Yes. And there's so much to be said for dividing the class into groups, group collaborative learning in small groups. And there's lots of material online about group tasks, collaborative learning in small groups, and some really nice videos as well of teachers doing it.
Okay, that's helpful. So maintain a kind of curious approach. And I'm guessing you'd say, from what you've told us, that applies across all of the things that you do. Yes.
And I guess if I wasn't curious about what's going on, I don't think any of it would work.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, with the kayaking and the maths, they're both a doing thing. someone's going to show you something, aren't they?
Yes.
And that's interesting because they're showing you, but then when you discuss it, you're going to be using words. And I'm wondering if, they can sometimes not find the words that they need to explain.
Yes, often.
Yeah.
Really, really often. And I think maybe that's partly where the curiosity and the respect comes in, because the articulation of these processes and of the sense we make can be quite difficult, but it's a really valuable skill. And, if students can learn to articulate their thinking about something, that will benefit all of the subject areas that they do. They'll benefit everywhere. And really, if you take maths up to mathematician level, that is what mathematicians do. They experiment, they explore, and then they try and communicate these, quite difficult ideas to other people. So communication is a fundamental math skill, and perhaps often an overlooked one.
Yeah.
And so, again, you working in a group, there's much more scope for developing communication skills in a group than there is in a one-to-one, really, from a math student's point of view, because they've got to communicate together, to work together. And then if they're feeding back to the rest of the class what they came up with, they've got to have a way of describing what they've done in a way that everyone else can understand, and maybe take questions from everybody else and try and answer them.
That's interesting. So, I'm imagining, there may be people who, even though they can't afford in their school to do individual work, they might be able to do some small group work. And maybe not to have this approach with everybody if it's too time intensive, but to have it with the group who aren't making much progress.
Yes, and it's, I think, another of the dilemmas people can have in a classroom is when you've got the high achievers and the low achievers, and you're trying to satisfy both. And there can be something to said for putting them together. Because the one who's grasped it very quickly might have grasped it very quickly, but can they articulate to somebody else what it is they've grasped? And can they articulate it to the person who's finding it the hardest? Do you see what I mean? So you're still developing their skills, even if you're giving them a sort of semi-teaching role.
That's very interesting. I think the Khan Academy
can only articulate it to the brightest members of this class. That's not really good enough. They've got to articulate it so everybody can get it.
Quite a task. Quite a challenge, that is, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Someone who struggles can understand. Have you come across the Khan Academy?
I have, yes.
Yeah, because they have that kind of approach when they do a flipped school, don't they? That the kids who are
recently, I think it's come a long way since I looked at it. When I looked at it years ago, it all seemed to be very, very repetitive and a bit boring. But I think
it may still be repetitive and boring. I don't know in terms of the content, but I quite like the idea of, if you have a kind of traffic light system that shows on the computer, and the teacher knows they need to help people who are on red because they're stuck.
Yes.
If they're on amber, somebody on green can help them, relatively easily, probably.
Yes.
And the teacher can focus on the ones who are really stuck. And it's kind of building on that idea of, once you can maybe help someone else to know as well.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, children receive information differently from their peers than from the teacher. So value in that as well.
Yes. Yeah. That's very interesting. I think there will be people listening to this who I'm hoping it will make them think, I hadn't really thought of PCP applied to these kind of things. Both the sports coaching bit, but also the maths in particular. And people are more familiar with it as a therapeutic input in terms of psychotherapy or counselling, but not so much with applying it to education. So that's been extremely helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad if it's useful.
Thanks very much indeed.
Pleasure.
So I hope you found that interesting. I'll put Jenny's information in the show notes, both her psychotherapy and kayaking contacts, but also her maths information. And she's given me a couple of animations that she's made. One's called Dancing Triangles and one is Angles and Polygons. So if you're a tutor or a teacher and you want to explain those kind of concepts, check out her animations because they're really nice. So that's it for the year. So I hope you have a really good end of the year and an excellent new year. And hopefully this will be the year that we can get to something like normal. We'll see about that. So I'll see you again at the end of January. Okay, thanks. Bye.